All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our feral watercolor making paint from your own foraged pigments. I'm joined by Grace Howard. Grace, say hello.
Hi.
Grace is our technical assistant, and if you're having trouble and you need something or you want to ask questions, pop that into the chat during the workshop, please. Grace will help you out, take care of things. She'll be dropping links in as I go and important things like that. So locate your chat, usually at the bottom. Hopefully you're not on iPads or phones because those tend to be too small to see what's going on. But do let her know if you need anything. Well, welcome again, as I said, to our feral watercolor workshop. And this is one of my favorite workshops to teach because it really dives us deep into what I think is a very special thing, and that is true place-based art and journaling, where you are taking soil from a place and creating paint and using it to depict, hopefully, maybe that place. And in other things. And it's deeply, deeply satisfying. And I just love it. It's a real passion of mine. I've also started to try to learn how to make my own inks. Going down that rabbit hole, they're much harder than pigments I'm finding. So a lot more to learn about chemistry. So our goal today is to learn what are pigments and paints. We're going to have some sort of early education, how to research sources around you, local pigments around where you are. I'll teach you how to, some tips on how to find pigments, which pigments to look for, what I recommend, then how to collect them safely and legally, which is really important. Then grinding them and sifting them and getting them ready to mull into paint, and then how to do that. And there's several demos today, which you'll be viewing. So I'll start out with a slideshow, and then we'll stop for some Q&As, and then we will go into a video showing some of the collection and processes that I use. And we'll come back, more questions, lots of interaction. And then I have my setup here. I'm going to do some live mulling so you can actually see more and talk to me and ask questions, you know, like, oh, why are you doing that? Or how do you know when to add more liquid or what have you? So that'll help you get used to the process. So I have created, so you don't have to like furiously take notes because there's a lot of information. This is incredibly dense. I created a PDF with all the information in it, all the links I'm going to talk about, and some extra stuff. So Grace is going to put the link in the chat right now where you can download that. You don't need it for the class right now, but you'll want that after because it's got all the notes. And of course, don't worry, we're recording this and you'll have access to it as long as you need. And you can always email me and ask me questions. So I think what we'll do is go ahead and get started with the slideshow, unless there's any basic questions now. Is everybody set? Judy, you can hear us okay? Hope so. So let Grace know if you need anything. So
I'm good. Sorry, I live on up in Haida Gwaii, it's an island, so you won't see me, and who knows. So
okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome. All right. Now, one quick thing I'm going to ask, if you don't mind, please, for the presentation portions, please make sure you're all muted right now. And for the recording, I'm going to ask that you please turn off your videos right now, because that actually takes a lot of bandwidth off on Zoom. And if you turn it off now, then I'll have a better recording for everybody later. And when we come back for Q&As and stuff, we'll have you turn them on so we can see each other, which is really nice. So thank you for that. All right. Well, welcome. I'm Roseann Hansen. A little bit of background about me. I am a naturalist, a artist, explorer. I have been keeping field notes, a keeper of field notes for over 35 years, closer to 40 years now. And I'm totally self-taught when it comes to the art, the field sketching and watercolor, which I've only been doing for about 5 years. And I love to help people explore the world through words, art, and science. I am the Art and Science Program Coordinator at the Desert Laboratory on Tumamoc Hill in Tucson, part of the University of Arizona. It's a 117-year-old field station, and it's a real honor for me to work there and share science and art with people from around the world. Today, I am working with the Natural History Institute in Prescott, Arizona. And if you are not familiar with them, if you're new to this, coming in through maybe a link from myself, be sure to check out the wonderful work that they do, blending the humanities and the sciences as well. So we have a really close tie with the Desert Laboratory on Tumamoc Hill, with the Natural History Institute. The Desert Lab, like I said, 117 years old, is also the birthplace of the sciences of ecology, plant physiology, arid land studies. So all of this kind of goes together. It's really exciting. Well, let's talk about pigments and how they've been used for hundreds of thousands of years, millennia and hundreds of thousands of years. Humans have been making pigments for painting objects, pottery, leather, walls of caves, even their own bodies for adornment for like I said, millennia. The use of ochre for decorations has been dated to at least 40,000 years before present in Australia. This image here is from an active, continuously active, ancient ochre gathering site in the center of Australia near Oodnadatta on traditional lands. And it is just filled with gorgeous yellow, red, purple ochres, brown ochres. It's just amazing to see. And it's a heritage site. Obviously, we don't collect anything there. The Aboriginal peoples, there are dozens and dozens of groups in Australia, still continue to gather their pigment here at this site. You can visit, it's wonderful to visit. On the continent of Africa, we know that pigment and ochres have been used by people for well over 200,000 years before present. There's even in Southern Africa, they found a 200,000+ paint palette kit, which just blows my mind how amazing that is, that already people were differentiating colors, being artists, using these as ways to communicate. Plant and lichen-based dyes also have ancient origins, but they've confidently dated archaeological sites now more than 300,000 years old, close to the emergence of Homo sapiens. This photo here is a very interesting project. My husband, Jonathan, and I worked with a group in Kenya, a Maasai community in Old Kiramatian in the Rift Valley. We partnered with them to support a workshop to create from scratch the traditional Maasai war shields, which these elder gentlemen knew how to make. Say, as young warriors, they learned how to make them. It was a dying knowledge of traditional knowledge. So we filmed it, and Jonathan and I published a video and a book for them that they can pass on through their own heritage center that's being built now. And they use, you can see the pigments on the shields, red ochres, bone black, a gray made also from ash, and the white is a limestone. And back to that photo, the gentleman there is mixing the red ochre pigment with cow's blood, which is how they make their media they use to create the paint. Absolutely amazing to watch this and how they did it, and also learned how to make the bone black with them as well. And so that was a very special project. In Tucson, around us, here in southern Arizona, there are thousands of Hohokam, the Hohokam people and other archaic peoples, archaeological artifacts have been identified as being decorated with locally gathered ochres, and studies have found the ochre sites where they believe these pigments were gathered in the Tucson Mountains in the north and the southern part of the mountains. I'll be showing you that more in a bit. Actually, just south of Tumamoc Hill, one of them is called Beehive Mountain. So again, ochres, these pigments have been part of the human experience for a very long time. And actually, numerous sites in Europe and Western Asia show that the Neanderthals, our closest evolutionary kin, also used ochre beginning at least 250,000 years ago. So it's really in our blood. So how did I get started with all of this? So back up 2017, my husband and I were exploring northern Arizona on our way up into Hopi lands, the Hopi native lands. And you cross an area that's one of my favorite places on the planet. It is called the Painted Desert. It's a storied land of vast, beautiful deserts. The little Colorado River runs through it on the way to the Colorado River. And the hills and the landscape are rose-colored, yellow-colored, rich red-colored, purpley colors. And it is a very special place. So while we were driving up there, I thought, well, I want to collect some of these. And I did so along the roadside, which is a legal right-of-way, and took it home and started trying to teach myself, okay, can I make paint out of this? And how do I do it? What do I need to do? So took deep dive, took well over a long time, year or more of research and trial and error and studying books. I bought books, internet websites, YouTube videos, and just learned that there's so much information. Half of it, more than half of it, is wrong. And you can actually watch it propagate across websites when people share incorrect information and unsafe information. I'll be talking about that. But finally, learned how to make paint and kept good notes. And this was what the outcome of that collection was, the three colors, the yellow, the rose, and the red ochres that I gathered from that area. And I'll be talking more about that process farther on. That was a really, that's really one of the things that just bing, that got me hooked. Look at that. I could actually paint the Painted Desert with earth from the Painted Desert. A year later after this, and I had really been getting into it, my husband, Jonathan, and I were on a research trip in northern Mexico in this incredible landscape. It is a reserve called La Reserva de Biosfera El Pinicate y Gran Desierto, the Gran Desierto, the Great Desert. And it is a vast area of volcanic mountains farther east. This is a little bit more to the west. This is a huge dune field called it is an aeolian dune field, meaning aeolian means these dunes were created over millions of years from wind, from dust borne on the wind from central and northern Arizona. The sand here is actually from the Colorado Plateau, hundreds of miles away. And the reason I'm showing this is you notice the pinky red color. And we're going to learn something about that. but the actual Sierra El Rosario there in the middle is a black mountain range, and that's where we were camped. So at camp, I started noticing the dry wash beds, the soil all around the base of those black mountains was covered in this black sand. And I had just happened to have ordered and gotten brought with me a new paint from Greenleaf and Blueberry. That is my favorite handmade paint maker. Jess Greenleaf is an absolute master of making paint. It's the only handmade paint that I think is worth buying. It's incredible. And she had just come out with magnetite, and it is magnetic. So, you know, the pigment paint, you can move it around on your paper with a magnet before it dries. So I had a magnet in my kit. Yeah, I carry a magnet in my kit. I dropped it in the sand there at the Sierra El Rosario, and bing, it's magnetic, it's magnetite. So of course, I just got all excited. I got some stuff from my camper and ground this up and put some water and a little bit of honey just to make a quick test to see, would this really make paint? And there in the middle, you can see it created paint. And in fact, the water mixed with the magnetite actually titrated out the red color from the Aeolian dunes, which are iron oxide. So that red ochre tint came out. So I completely geeked out on this. This just got me super, super excited. And I ended up collecting. Now you're going to learn that when we create watercolor paint, we use the classic binder is called gum arabic, and it is a type of acacia. It is a resin. The actual substance is a resin. So I collected resin from a plant there in the Sierra El Rosario called Bursera. It is a beautiful tree. Its resin is very similar, related to copal. Smells incredible like that. So I was able to melt it down, add oxgall and honey, and create paint that I used to make an actual painting. I painted the El Rosario Mountains using El Rosario magnetite, and then I used that to do some of the shadows, the echinocactus, and the black around the saguaro number 7. We determined there were 7 saguaro cactuses in their cacti in the Sierra El Rosario. So we cataloged each of them. So that is what just got me hooked on place-based art and making your own paint from found pigments. And I love this quote that I found. The stuff that artists use when they make a work of art influences both form and content. Every material brings something special to the creative process and the finished work. Materials influence how artists make their work and how viewers perceive it. And that is the essence of what we're doing. Now, we're going to roll all the way back though now and talk about the beginnings. And the reason is, when I did all my research, I was looking at websites and I bought books, and almost all of them without fail just assumed I knew a lot of the nomenclature and things about paint and pigment, which I didn't. And I got very confused. And so I think it's really helpful to go, it always is for me, if I learn the most I can about something, then I understand how it behaves. And that helps me become a better artist, scientist, naturalist. It's just part of our education, why we love to do what we do. So let's go all the way back and talk about what is pigment, because that's important. That's how we determine what we're going to collect. So it is literally a colored substance that is, basically you can break pigments down into 2 categories. This is very broad, but this works for our purposes. So there are organic pigments, which, think of those, these are carbon based. So carbon chains, carbon rings, complex carbon chemistry. pigments they can be naturally or synthetically derived. And so an example of known organic pigments you might know of, alizarin crimson, indigo is made from plant, Indian yellow, azo yellow, those are organic pigments. Inorganic pigments are not based on carbon chains, but on minerals, and usually metallic metals and metallic salts. So such as metal oxides, iron oxides, those are the ochres, the siennas, the umbers, carbon and bone black. So when the gentleman who we worked with in the Rift Valley in Kenya made the black paint, they knew how to take bones and burn them in a low oxygen atmosphere in a campfire for many, many, many hours, actually was several days, and get the right charred bone to grind into paint, which they did. And then the others are minerals such as, these are also metal-based, manganese, and then azurite, malachite, chrysocolla, those are copper-based, and then lapis lazuli, which is ultramarine, if you know that color. So the picture here is lapis lazuli pigment being molded. Now, next step, what is paint? What makes paint? So it's something you never really think about. Well, you guys obviously do because you're here, but what is paint? Because, you order it, you get your nice little block, you open it up, bing, you have your paint or your tube, arrives in the mail, and you don't even think about what goes into making paint. So I'm going to break it down into its components. And this is what I had to teach myself to learn how to make paint. I needed to know what all these things were. So many of the websites are like, yeah, just add the binder, add the humectant, I didn't know what they were and what they were for. So paint is pigment particles suspended in a medium. What are the media that we could use? So water as a media makes watercolor. Oil will make oil paint. If you add egg yolk or egg white, that is known as casein paint. And if you use an acrylic polymer emulsion, that is acrylic paint. So very simple there. But then there are additives to make things happen. So a binder helps the paint adhere to surfaces, whether it's paper, the wall of the cave, your body. It's often gum arabic, and that is a plant resin from the Acacia senegal, a sub-Saharan species of acacia. You can, as I found out, you can use other acacia resin, acacia species, but that's the one that's commonly available commercially. Then you need a humectant, which helps the paint retain moisture, and that is often honey or glycerin. And then a dispersant, and that prevents clumping and increases the flow across the surface of the whatever you're painting on, paper especially. It's called a wetting agent, and it's often ox gall, which traditionally it literally is gall from the gallbladder of an ox. I believe it's mostly synthetic now, but very interesting that continued to be used till very, very recently. And then a fungicide is often used to suppress mold or bacteria. I don't have that problem as much in the Southwest where it's so dry, but many people do. So honey is a good natural fungicide, and some people use clove oil. I've never used that. But honey then would do double duty as a humectant and a fungicide. So I do use that. And there's a well-known paint maker called M. Graham, and they make their beautiful paints from honey, with honey as a humectant and fungicide, where I think most makers are using glycerin. Now, what is watercolor? We're getting down to the nitty-gritty here. And this is where there's tons of misinformation on the internet, like, oh, really? Yeah, the internet, something wrong? So mulling is the process of pressing pigment particles and additives between two flat planes so that the pigment particles are coated with the binder and the additives. It's really important to understand that mulling is not grinding. It does not reduce the size of the particles appreciably. So it's binding, not grinding. Grinding requires a whole different action. So that's important to realize. And that's why the times vary greatly. We'll talk about more. The other thing I learned is that the ratios of additives to pigment vary hugely. More or less additive is needed depending on especially the pigment particle sizes and the type of pigment. So when loads of websites are like, oh, you have to mull for, at least an hour. And believe me, if you haven't tried it yet, or some of you probably have, mulling is incredibly tedious and an hour is insanely difficult. So what I learned though, is that an hour is what you're going to need, say, to process this lapis lazuli, because that is a commercially produced pigment powder that I got from Cornelison's in London. And it's incredibly fine grained, so tiny, tiny pigment size, particle sizes. And you need so much more time to get that binder on every single particle all the way around it. So maybe that is when you would do an hour. So the good thing is with ochres and things, pigments that you collect and process yourself, they're pretty big particle sizes, and so much easier and much quicker to mull. So you don't have to kill yourself too much on them. It's a little easier. So in general, small particle sizes need longer mulling times. And now we get to the really fun stuff. So what I recommend is for beginning pigment hunters that you start with looking for and collecting iron oxides. They're one of the most common minerals, easily found and processed in inorganic earth pigments. They are all over the place. It isn't just in the Southwest or deserts. They're easy to find pretty much anywhere, and I'm going to talk about how to find them. And let's talk about the different types and what they're called, because these names will be how you will use the internet for a good thing to search for sources of these earth pigments, these inorganic minerals. So yellow, something that yields a yellow color, is going to come from a mineral called limonite, also called gutite, or yellow ochre. So that's what you would search for. The reds are going to come from hematites, the red ochres, pyrite. The greens are going to come from something called glauconite, also called terre verte, and green ochres. A blue pigment can be found. It's a very dark blue. It's not a bright blue, from vivianite, which is it's an iron oxide, but it's an iron phosphate, ferrous phosphate, rather than oxide. So I said it was an iron oxide. Wrong. It's an iron phosphate. So a little bit different. And then black from magnetite, as you saw. And then browns and what I call purple ochres come the umbers, come from umbers and gutite, or the limonite. That's a synonym. I recently learned, and I'll show you that why. So I had to learn that those are actually probably the same thing. They initially thought those were two different rocks, but they're not. So those are kind of the basics. These are in that handout, the PDF I provided for you, so you don't need to scribble all this down. Where do you look? Let's talk about that briefly here. So easiest place to find things, and it makes your life easier too, is areas of deeply weathered soils. So a lot of the work's been done for you. Things have been sifted down. So road cuts, perfect, because they get rained on, they're eroded, they've already washed things down into cuts, and it's legal to collect there too. So dry wash beds along the sides of river channels. The nature has already done a lot of the work of sifting things out. So those are really great places to look. Then look in areas of highly mineralized soils, such as old mine dumps. They need to be inactive on public lands. So meaning inactive, meaning there isn't an active mine claim, which is a privately owned claim. So people own mineral rights. So it has to be inactive. And you can find these, I'll talk about how, by searching through public land databases. So another example of looking at mineralized soil areas, magnetite is often found in the sand alongside or in rivers in the sand. You can see the black streaks. The shores of Lake Michigan, for example, are like black sand, which is all magnetite, or in dry wash beds, like I said. And you use a magnet for collecting them. Makes it really simple. Another place to look is in swamps and springs. I don't have as much of that around here, but you can look for masses of bright yellow ooze in swampy areas where the limonite is produced by iron-forming bacteria. So not all pigments are 100% rock yet. Maybe like way down in millions of years from now, that will be limonite in a hard form, but iron-forming bacteria are producing pigments that you can use now too. So that's really a fun way to look. How are we doing? Any questions yet, Grace? In the chat, how are we doing?
None in chat, so.
Okay, good. So now I'm going to talk about how I went about finding more specific pigments in my area. And there are two ways you can go about it. And the first one I'll talk about is using Google Earth. And I like Google Earth, not just Google Maps, but the app called Google Earth, which is great. It's now available through your browser. You do not have to download a separate app anymore. The old Google Earth app was getting very unstable anyway. So this is a much better version. So you just go to earth.google.com and call up your region and start looking around. Now in my region, it's a little easier because we don't have like huge forested areas covering most of the ground. But in your area, even if you have a lot of tree cover, you can use this to snoop around, maybe for around river areas, deltas, things like that, to look for differential colors. And that's what I'm looking for. So in this Google Earth satellite view of the Tucson Mountains, the Tucson Basin, you can see west of there, I'm looking at Tucson Mountain Park. Here's my cursor. Looking at that red right there. It's like, wow, is that really that red? So I zoom in, and indeed, Brown Mountain, and then the mountains around the Red Hills Visitor Center in Saguaro National Park are incredibly red. Those are iron-rich hills. Now, we can't go, this is in Saguaro National Park. You don't collect in there. We'll talk about that in a minute. But along the road here, on the way to the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum, and along this road here, in the washes, the creek beds, the dry creek beds, you can find pieces of this reddish purple rock. So cool. That really ended up being, I'll show you the pigment that I was able to make from that one. And that was how I found it. Now, if you like I said, if you're in an area where you simply have too much tree cover to do a lot of snooping with Google Earth, also use, and I use this as well, go to good old Google and look for specific names of the iron oxide rocks that I talked about. So for example, I Googled Tucson ochre hematite. And what I'm looking for are academic sources, not blogs and websites of casual. There's only a few pigment hunters I would trust. So, but like I wouldn't use blogs. A lot of misinformation there. But academic sources, you can usually get enough out of these. You don't even have to have access to the databases. Even just the synopses of these will help you out. So I immediately found hematite sources and archaeological ochres from the Tucson Basin. Absolutely chock full of information about these ochre sites. And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute too. Looking in the Pacific Northwest, I typed in natural pigment materials in the Pacific Northwest and found great digital library information about ochres and mineral pigments there, popped up right at the top. And lots of good history articles about 4,000-year-old color grinding stones found in the Northwest coast. So lots of good information out there. So here's that paper I was talking about that I grabbed, and that was available, easy to get. And it's elemental analysis and characterization of ochre sources from southern Arizona. And this was specifically to study those Hohokam pigment sources that we know are on the pottery that the Hohokam decorated. And they determined that that ochre came from, there were 2 mines of red ochre in the Tucson Mountains, one of them in the north at Rattlesnake Pass here, and one of them south of Highway 86 down at the bottom here. It's called Beehive Hill. Now, Beehive Hill, I determined it was on private land. So that wasn't going to work unless I could get a hold of the landowner and say, hey, could I come onto your property, which you can do if you're gutsy. But I was excited to see Rattlesnake Pass is actually a legal road cut. It's a major road going across there. So, okay, I'm going to go there. That's perfect. So that's how I decided where I was going. So legalities, let's talk about this, because that was the next thing I did. Okay, I'm going to Rattlesnake Pass. I want to make sure that was a big legal road. It is. The road cut is perfect. The land around it, I researched, is Pima County owned, and I definitely would not be able to hike in and take any pigment from there. The best places that have really great regulations for collecting soil rocks are the Bureau of Land Management, that's a land management agency, a federal, and the federal U.S. Forest Service. Back east, you guys don't have as much of the Bureau of Land Management land. That's a little more common, a lot more common back here in the West. And then there are also across the country, there are lands called state lands that are owned by your states. And they all have different rules for collecting. And the recreational mineral collecting is actually called rock hounding. So you can actually use that to search in your area. So rock hounding sites. So in Arizona, Nevada, Utah, rock hounding is a major thing. I grew up doing it. My dad loved to collect minerals and stuff. So he'd drag us kids out with bags and little hammers, and we'd go looking for all sorts of mineral specimens and things. It was super fun. It's how how this got in my blood, right? So the Bureau of Land Management and the Forest Service have pretty open rules on it. So the specimens have to be for personal use. So you can't be collecting tons of it and selling it. The limit is 25 pounds per day, a total limit of 250 pounds per year. So when you're collecting, we were talking about, I mean, this rock here will process down, probably make a half pan of paint. So you don't need a lot of this stuff. So tiny amounts. So you have to though know where you are. So make sure when you're heading out, you have gone out, go to an outdoor store, get the correct current maps, know the boundaries, use your outdoor skills, and know who the land management, the owner is, and the land management agency, and then research what's legal. Even call them up, say, or go look for, rock hounding sites, my area. you'd be surprised what pops up. There's actually specific sites out here set aside for rock hounding, that, you know, just basically anything goes. It's pretty fun. So, and then maybe the easiest and best thing to deal with is private land with permission. So you know someone, or find someone and get to know them, and just see if you can gather something from their site. Now, safety. This is where I ran into a lot of scary stuff on the internet, because what I see a lot, especially blogs, RT blogs, arts and crafts blogs, is like, oh, they think, you know, it's natural pigments, they're safe for you. You know, I'm worried about toxic elements in my watercolor, so I'm going to make natural organic paint and it's all going to be good. No, no, no. Absolutely not true. Assume what you collect is toxic all the time and handle it that way. Educate yourself about geology and soil properties. Do not go into this blind thinking the word organic is in there, so that means it's safe. For example, cinnabar is something you can collect. It's not super common, but it is present in North America. It releases arsenic when it's processed. That's not something you want to be breathing in. Same with serpentine, which is a green rock that is, there's a lot of it in Arizona. It's probably all over. It has asbestos in it. So if you're grinding that up, that's not going to be something you want to be dealing with. And likewise, copper-based minerals, right? The azurite, malachite, chrysocolla, turquoises. In its raw form, it's pretty poisonous. So again, I don't recommend those for casual pigment making. That's why I steer people to the iron oxides. But again, you want to treat everything like it's toxic. Not to scare you, but you just want to be smart. So you always wear PPE, personal protection equipment. So dust mask with filter, eye protection, always, because if you're when you're doing the grinding, which I'll show you, or pounding, you've got a mortar and pestle, you want to protect your eyes. And even when you first start out mulling and you've got powder, you'll see in the video I'm going to show you how much powder is aerosolized when you're doing this, and you can get that in your eyes and scratch your corneas. So eye protection and gloves, of course. And then finally, dispose of it properly. Do not broadcast your soils and dust into your own yard, because it can carry microbes and invasive species seeds from other regions, and you're broadcasting it into your area. So, and when you rinse your tools and sieves and things, do it into a municipal drain where that gets treated and things are removed from the water. Store your pigments in double bags or jars out of direct sunlight. Don't throw them away. So don't collect a ton of them. My little jars that I collect, are usually no more than that much. And then I have, a pigment safe where I keep them in out of the light. And I'm never going to throw them away. I'm going to make sure that they don't get accidentally broadcast out anywhere. You can also sterilize them, but that's difficult to do in a home environment. So don't collect too much. Don't toss this stuff out. Assume it's got microbes and stuff, invasive species seeds in it. Well, it's time to go hunting. What I'm going to be doing next is I'm going to take you to Rattlesnake Pass. We're going to jump in my Land Cruiser and head out there, and I'll show you exactly what it looks like and what the collecting looked like. And then we're going to come back and process it. And this is all going to be on a video. So right now I'm going to stop the share though and just check in and see what kind of questions. Grace, what have we got questions wise?
So we currently have 2 questions in chat. Meg asked, what about crushing black volcanic stone that was lifted from soft flowing lava?
I don't understand the question. Can you read? I turned up, your volume was a little low.
What about crushing black volcanic stone that was lifted from soft flowing lava?
Got it. We'd want to research kind of what the what material that was from. You should be able to probably figure that out with some research. And yes, you could definitely test that wearing your equipment to see if it's got anything that would yield paint. It's going to need to have, you know, some element that can create pigment, though. Not everything does. So that's kind of the fun. I've collected some stuff I thought would make really cool pigment, and it didn't. So, you know, it's worth trying a teeny bit from that. And oh, I see another question about public lands. So the definition of public lands: federally owned, state owned, county, municipal owned. That's public land. But each agency that is in charge of those lands has different rules. So National Park Service, you know, Grand Canyon National Park, Zion National Park, Yosemite National Park, absolutely no collecting anything. Do not collect there. You just don't do it. Other agencies, lands that are owned by national forests, Bureau of Land Management, those lands are managed for more human use and activities, and they allow more leeway to collect rocks and things. So you have to know where you're going, who owns it, do the research, find out what's legal. So I hope that answered your question, Michelle. If not, let us know in the chat. So sorry, I didn't make that clear. And so Meg, if you do an experiment on the lava, which I haven't done yet, I'd love to know. And road cuts are pretty much all, you know, just stay right by near the road. Don't go into the lands around it. There's usually fences. And yeah, that's a legal right of way just for collecting a little bit. You don't want to go digging with shovels and stuff. No, but you don't need a lot. So Michelle, if you put something in the chat, make sure it's to the whole group, because Grace can't see it if you do it directly to me. I can see it now, but when I'm actually presenting, I can't see it. So if you produce watercolor on site in the national park and paint in your journal, is that considered collecting? And I would say, yeah, if you had like a real hard ass park ranger, they could get you in trouble for that. I can't imagine that they would, but you know, taking some sand out of the Yellowstone River, sitting next to it, making paint real quick. I don't know. I have to say though that they would probably, letter of the law, consider that illegal. I don't know. It sounds silly, but you know, I would probably have to say you just need to go with, you know, Park Service. No, go to the national forests. Okay, so I think what we'll do now, if there's no more questions, anyone, then what we will do is I'm going to take you collecting. All right.
So I've done my research. I know I'm going to head out to Rattlesnake Pass in the Tucson Mountains. I've got my maps. I've got my information about the pigments here. And so let's head out. Let's go hunt for some wild pigments. So here we are at the Rattlesnake Pass, and you can see the hills are really red. And so we're going to head out. Being careful, the road is really busy. This is where Silver Bell Road turns into Twin Peaks Road. So I can hear a rock wren right now, and let's go exploring. You see how red the rocks are. And what I'm looking at here is a drainage, a cutaway right by the road. And these often are really great spots to find well sifted soil. And like this right here is a really good example. You can see it leaves a nice reddish color on my hand. So lots of oxides in that. And if I get that a little wet, sometimes that's a good way to tell just how good the color is here. So you can see here, I've collected these clods. So they're from a rain event a while ago, and they're little clods of mud that have dried, and they have really good potential for being made into, ground down into pigment and made into paint. So I'm excited about that. All right, I'm back in my studio, and let's take a look at what we've got to work with. So here's the first collection I made on the road cut. And now that I have it here in less harsh light, I can see this is a little lighter than the clumps that I picked up right up the cut under the tree. These are going to be a bit more promising, I think, and we'll process these separately and then test them. It's the same soil, but with different oxidation levels, heat exposure, they may end up a little bit different. And then these are rocks that I picked up that had dropped down from those dark hills above. You can see how some of them are really, really dark red. These might process out from my crusher into more of my purple, the Tucson Mountains purple, which is one of my favorite pigments that I collected further south along the road to Gates Pass. And it processes out into an amazing true purple ochre, which is one of my favorite paints. I use it frequently, augmented with a little burnt sienna to make really great desert rocks. You can see here some of the many samples and bits and pieces I collect wherever we travel. And over here is some of the pigment that I've processed. So I have Burnt Mountain there from Namibia, Chiricahua ochre, which turned out beautiful orange. Back in the back, my Painted Desert, which kind of started this whole thing. I collected from road cuts the 3 colors of the Painted Desert. A Catalina's granite with a lot of mica in it. And those back there are collected sands from the deserts of Australia. I haven't made any pigment from those yet. And then these are my purchased pigments from England, Clearwell Caves, Florence Printmakers, which is a famous iron mine, and then made pigments, manganese blue and vermilion from Cornelison's in London. So you can see just some of the many different hues you can get collecting pigments. So, but let's head over, and I'm going to start processing these and see what I get. All right, here we are at the grinding station. This is a burr grinder I got on eBay for about $20. You want the burr grinders set on extra fine, and then just turn it on, and I guess sometimes you got to help it down into the hopper. And you might have to run this through a couple of times to get enough fine pigment for sifting. And that's looking really good. Now here I'm using my set of Talisman sieves, which are created for the pottery industry for people who sift their own glazes. And I go from 40 to 200 mesh. So I've put the pigment in the top and it's sifting down through the different mesh sizes. The final size is approximately, it's going to be between 100 and 200 microns. You can see the dust there. This is why we use dust masks. You don't want to be inhaling this. And there we have our pigment ready to do a final push through the finest sieve. So this will get me down to about 100 microns, which is good for making handmade paint. Speed it up a little bit there and just checking the, yep, see it's come through. We've got a good amount of pigment there. So I'm going to collect that. You know, that's enough for a couple of half pans, maybe a full pan of paint, which lasts a long time. And then you just keep sifting, sifting, sifting. Here we are in the studio. I've got my mulling set up, so I'm getting ready to mold that pigment that we just finished grinding and sifting. So I have my muller, the glass muller. I have a burnished piece of tempered glass that's frosted on the top to help increase the friction as we bind the binder, literally, to the pigment. I have my binder and humectant pre-mixed. This is gum arabic and honey, which is my preferred. And distilled water. And a paintbrush and water for testing my pigment when I get it mold to the point where I want to see how it's looking. So I also have a palette knife, which is used for scraping up, you'll see, as we process the pigment. And my gloves. So I think we're ready to get started and mold some pigment, which, depending on the pigment, takes anywhere from 10 minutes to a whole hour. It just depends on the size of the particles and how long it takes the binder to bind to the pigment. You are not changing the size of the pigment particles. You're not crushing it. You are literally combining all the binder materials with the pigment so that it's a nice, even solution. So let's get started. I like to start with a small amount of pigment. A lot of the websites and things recommend, a couple of teaspoons. That actually is a lot to process, and it gets really messy and splooches over the edges of your mixing plate, since mine's pretty small. So you want to wet it a little bit with the distilled water. So it's like softened butter. And mix that up really well. And then you're going to add the binder in humectant. So that's half a teaspoon of pigment. And what I'm going to do is I start with less than half a teaspoon. Just get that ready. You want to start with less binder to pigment. A lot of websites will say 1-to-1, but I find that can be way too much. And if you get too much
binder, it's really hard to fix that. It's much easier to add a drop or two of binder at a time than it is to go get more pigment, and then you end up with a bit of a mess. So go lighter on the binder at first. So I'm mixing with the palette knife until it gets nice and soupy. And then getting ready to actually mull. Adding a little bit more water. Remember, the water is going to evaporate. So I'm keeping the muller in contact with the glass, but I'm not pressing super hard. You have to keep it moving. And at times I have to pause and lift up an edge like there. See how that's stuck? Now I'm speeding this up. So you take your palette knife, you scrape everything back to the center, scrape it off, mull, mull, mull. Remember, I'm going to be doing this again, so we'll have plenty of opportunities for questions and demos. But this is probably about a 10 to 15 minute process you're looking at, all speeded up here. So moving it around and around and around, scraping, see how it goes to the edges of the glass. If you do a whole bunch at once, it's going to be kind of hard to control. So if we're just starting out, that's why we do a smaller amount of pigment. Plus, if it's not pretty, it's not something you like, you haven't done a whole ton of it for hours. So I added a little bit more binder, and I'm using my instincts here. I want it to be plastic and feel like it's starting to, it's going to be like a thick toothpaste. Now, testing is really an important step. So use an old paintbrush, because handmade pigments from these minerals are really rough on expensive brushes. They're abrasive. So there I'm testing it out. And another important test is to put some clear water and drop some paint into it. See how well it disperses. That's that dispersant property I talked about. I'm going to drop that in and see, does it bloom nicely? Does it starburst, which we do want? I did notice that the top there of the initial paint is pretty chalky. It's pretty thick. It also, when I drop it into clear water, it does not disperse well. I'm going to show you more after I add a little bit more binder. Notice just a little few drops. And then it's like another 5 minutes of, or more, a little less or more, until it feels good. That was water I was adding. Just keep mixing. Scrape, mix, scrape, mull, scrape, mull. And then you'll test it again. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, that was a lot silkier. It felt better on the paper. And now watch the bloom here. See how that spreads and disperses nicely? And it's brighter and it looks prettier on the paper. So I was happy with that. So now I'm going to just continue, just mix that up, do a final mix. Now, there's an example of paint with too much binder. It gets hard and glossy. That's just not that's not good paint. That's dead. So you don't want to put too much binder. So be cautious with that. So when I fill up, here's an example of how I fill up the pans. And this is just a little tip. I don't fill them all the way full to the top, flat across the top, I fill them at an angle like this. And that gives me a nice little ramp and a place to put my brush and create a little well of paint there. Once it's dried and I'm using it, it's a lot easier on your brushes, and it's just more convenient than a big pile of paint that doesn't have a way for you to get your brush in it. So just a little tip there. And remember, these are going to dry. This is that's a half pan of paint, and you'll see what they look like in a few minutes when I do some more live stuff. And here's an example of the Rattlesnake Pass Orange Ochre and the Brown Mountain Purple. I'm actually doing a sketch of the mountains themselves, which was really fun. And that was it. Okay. All right, let's go back now. I'm gonna go to gallery view. And let's see what kind of questions we have. And feel free to turn your videos on and let's chat for a few minutes, because the next step is I'm going to actually do a live mulling and demo. So you get to see it again and kind of get more of a feel for what you're doing. So Grace can help me with some of the questions. I'll grab, okay, so there were some good questions about the ratios of the gum when you're making the gum arabic, oxgall, honey, and all that. So one of the things I recommend if you're just starting out is to use a premix. This is by Schminke. That's kind of getting glaring. Schminke is the brand. This is a premix gum arabic with oxgall and the humectant all ready to go. This is glycerin. So if you ordered the pigment kit, this is what I sent you. And it's much easier when you're just starting out, because if unless you just like really want to go into the deep end, making your own binder, then you're doing two things. So if you've done any scientific research, you'll know that you want to just test one thing at a time. You don't want to be doing multiple things. So get good at doing the pigments and figuring out the mixing by using the pre-made. Then when you're comfortable with playing with dirt, then you can try making your own solution of binder and humectant, because this took me a long time to get it right. I put like too much oxgall and it was just blah, the paint went crazy because it dispersed too much. I put too much honey and then it's sticky and gross. I put too much gum arabic and it gets that awful sheen. So the ratios are, I dropped some in the PDF I prepared for you guys. There's some websites that have some good ratios on how to mix this. But in general, the ratios are, so you take your gum arabic solution. You either buy the gum arabic. So here's a gum arabic solution from Winsor Newton. So they've already created the liquid gum arabic. And you can buy oxgall too from Winsor Newton. You take your gum arabic, and the ratio is, so when you add the honey, it's 4:1 is what they say to start with. So 4 parts oxgall, 1 part honey. And then you're talking about just a few drops of oxgall per cup of liquid. So if you've got half a cup of gum arabic, you're going to put like 1 or 2 drops of oxgall max. But you got to experiment and see how that works for you, because it can vary with the different brands. Gum Arabic also comes dried. This is a really good source for all this stuff. It's called earthpigments.com. So this is powdered form, and it has the recipe, so you can make your own. And then you can use local honey, so you're really doing truly place-based stuff, which is really awesome. I just adored being able to make my own that paint that I did with the magnetite, using resin from the place and honey from the Sonoran Desert. So it was 100% local paint, which was super fun. So here's I just have a little bit left of it here. It's just in a tiny little container. So that was fun to do. So you can experiment your own. If you come upon a resinous plant and you can pull some sap off, that's all I did. Experiment, have fun with it. But don't try to learn pigments and binder at the same time, or you might end up with a mess. So get good at the pigments first, and then you can start playing with your binders. Ask me how I know how much mess I made. That's why I'm sharing here. It's like, you can skip the mess. So other questions, let's see. Nice. So Kathy says she tried to make paint from mesquite bark. It didn't turn out as well as I wanted. Okay, so any recommendations on how to make paint from mesquite? Okay, so making pigments and paint from plant materials. I'm going to be talking about that in the second half. It's a completely different animal than mineral. Plant, mineral, you do it different ways. So we can talk about that. I'll cover that in a second. And remind me, Kathy, when we get to that, to talk about mesquite. Because one of the things I noticed is mesquite sap, right? You guys who live in our area, when you see, like, you cut a mesquite tree and then the sap that drips down is incredibly dark and staining. So maybe, maybe that can become a pigment. I don't know. Joy says, I work with wild clays and wonder if some of them would make good pigments. Absolutely. Clays they make fabulous pigments, depending on what properties. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too, because sometimes people have added natural clays to plant-based coloring to make some really cool paints. And we'll get to that. So I will get to that. I don't have a lot of experience with it, but clays often make, I have a paint here I'll show you that was very clay based, had tons of great mica in it, and was an iron oxide. So someone asked, so rubbing it on your fingers and looking at the color on your hands was the hint I got for that area. So yes, when I'm looking at soil, you can do that. Rocks, it's a little harder. For example, so I was like at the road cut, and yeah, I just spit on my fingers, and the soil was red. Cool, that's great. Here's a rock. Check this out. So I'm just picking up this rock here. Look at the stain that's just left on my fingers. So I'm actually going to process this. This is purple ochre from Namibia. And yeah, that immediately told me that is a pigment, right? It's like, ooh, super staining. Gonna wipe these on my pants. But here's one. I'll show you this one too. This is rocks that I collected in the Chiricahua Mountains by the road in National Forest. And if there's no color came off this. So I was just guessing, but it ended up making a really cool paint because it's an iron oxide, but I had to crush it, grind it, and process it. So we'll talk about that and all the different forms that you can do to get cool pigment. A lot of it is just experimenting. I had no idea when I collected this rock if it would make paint. So I just had to go for it. That's kind of the fun. So Yeah, how would you modify the steps for plant-based pigments? So that's really not this workshop, but we'll talk a little tiny bit about it. You know, that's my next rabbit hole. But plant pigments are hard, and you got to have more chemistry background. I'll show you why. So I'm going to show you now. Someone's asking, Sarah, so you use about half a teaspoon pigment and a bit less than half a teaspoon binder. And this distilled water, she says, how much water? Well, who bakes? Who does baking, working with a lot of flour? You'll probably know that depending on ambient humidity and the weather, that you're going to have different liquid going into your bread making at different times. Then, you know, so in summer here, I use a ton more water in my bread than I would if it's raining in the winter. It's the same for your pigment here. So you're just gonna, I'll demonstrate it and we'll take a look. So I'm gonna switch to my document camera now. And so now we're pretty open here. So just go ahead and call out as I'm doing this, just ask questions aloud. Don't worry about chat. Oh, Patty, thank you for asking, do you crush before grinding? The answer is yes, if it is a rock versus soil. So in the second half slideshow, I will show the crusher I use to deal with rock. Soil's a lot easier, so that's why we start with that. Okay. Oh, I'm going to switch away from gallery view so I can see what I'm doing. All right. So if you have questions, just chime in. I wear a mask when I'm first dealing with the dry powder, and then I'll have to take it off because I can't talk. I found out the hard way, like doing a lot of talking, wearing a mask. I tried to co-teach a class with someone live earlier this year, and I almost passed out from lack of oxygen because you don't get enough when you're talking through a mask. So putting on my gloves. I'm going to be doing the Burnt Mountain from Namibia. This was a intrusion into a volcanic area that has tons of iron oxide, and it got superheated. So it turned this incredibly dark color. And I was able to grind it really quite easily without a lot of crushing. I'm going to make less than a half teaspoon. So, because this stuff lasts for such a long time. I don't need a lot, so I'm not going to process a lot. So water on the left. Notice how hydrophobic that was. All right, take the mask off. It's now fully wet. It was really hydrophobic. I had to really smoosh that around. Probably have a little bit too much water, but it's gonna evaporate. Now, This is the binder humectant. I'm going to do, so remember I had less than half a teaspoon here, so I'm not going to use all of that because there's just not a lot here and I don't want to overdo it. So I'm just going to put a little bit in here. Mix it around. This is a pretty fine pigment. Not as fine, it's not nearly as fine as the commercial one though. I'm gonna have to move these up here. So I'll be sure to say if I'm adding water or binder. Now this isn't so, this is pretty, I want to say it's pretty quiet, it's pretty slick, so I have a lot of water. This is probably too much water. See how easily this moves? So it's going to take me a minute to see that it was stuck. There we go. So it's starting to stick more now, which is you want to be kind of halfway between kind of sticking, but you got to be able to move it. And I'm not pressing really hard. You don't want to, especially if you're using household items, you know, like a glass just to experiment with, don't press hard. You don't want to break it. This mulling set came with the glass, this plastic, what do you call it? You know, the padding, the palette knife, the muller, and I think it was like $90. So it was a lot. It's not cheap, but you can get these mullers for about $20 and then go to a hardware store and get tempered glass and look for frosted glass. You can frost it yourself by with very, very fine sandpaper, but it's really hard to do. So just go to like Ace Hardware and ask for frosted glass. So I'm moving it around and around and around as I'm getting toward the edges. Now I'm going to want to pull it farther in with my palette knife. Look at how dark this is. Still pretty soupy. Look like very much, but this will actually make a decent amount. This is a very staining paint, and you just don't use a lot of it. So these palette knives are really flexible, and that's what does help a lot. You can use a putty knife from the hardware store, but these aren't expensive. You know, a couple of bucks really for a cheap one. I'm going to do one more pass and then we're going to test it just for fun to see where it's at. I'm thinking there's probably not enough binder in this, but I'm not sure. Every pigment has different properties and it's going to behave differently, which is why you can't have a set formula. This is getting harder to move now, so that's good in that I have less water, which is good. I think I had it a little too soupy. See how that stuck? So I'm moving quicker than I normally would because, you know, I'm trying to get you guys a lot of exposure to different stuff. So I probably mold this a little more before testing, but I'm going ahead and test now. I think I mentioned already, I'll mention again, use an old brush, a brush, or a sturdy synthetic brush to test these. And even when you're painting with them, because these natural pigments have the bigger particles are really hard on your good brushes, so they will kind of tear them apart. So I'm mixing this with a little water. Let's see what it looks like here. That's really dark. It's a beautiful color. And I think it's a little, yep. So it's going to be really chalky. I need more. See how it's drying almost instantly. See how it's losing the sheen so quickly? Yes, I'm in the desert, but there's not enough binder in there, so that's like super chalky. So here's clear, getting just clear water there. Let's drop in some paint. Let's see, that dispersed quickly, but it clumped in the middle. See that? It's not really dispersing, it's still doesn't have enough dispersal agent, and it's really flat. So to get a nice paint, I'm going to need more of this. I'm going to add just a few drops though. I don't want to overdo it. Maybe just one more. There. Those are just 2 drops. It's really sticking to the palette here. So now it's time to add water again. So this is just water to get some of the extra unstuck. And if I put too much water, then it just means longer time period. I'm going to have to mull it until it evaporates. So it's really dry in Arizona right now. So this is drying out on the plate so quickly. So if you're in an area where you've got plenty of moisture in your atmosphere, you're not going to have this happening as fast. I remember when I was first learning watercolor, how frustrated I was because I didn't realize the fact that it was drying so quickly on my paper here was just frustrating the heck out of me. And I didn't realize it was, atmospheric. I've got to loosen that up. There we go. So I'm pressing lightly, not hard. I'm trying to just picture in my head. Okay, I'm trying to, all those little teeny particles, I want them to meet that binder, that sticky stuff, the gum arabic, the honey, the oxgall, and it needs to bind to those particles literally. So I'm trying to imagine that and think of it that way. So got a fair amount of water here. Again, it's now this is going to take a while to mull it around. This color is just amazing though. The longer you mull, the better it'll be. I'm going to test that real quick. Normally I'd mull for a bit more, but again, we're kind of, I'm wanting to make sure we get enough time here for everything. See how that does. See if we can tell the difference. This is how you learn. So I'm doing the clear water right there. This is how we learn that bloomed a little better. And I'm still thinking it might need just a tiny bit more binder, but now we're at the point where that we could add too much. Yeah, we're right on the edge. I think see how quickly that, yeah, that's doing better than the other one did. I think my gut would be if I added one more little drop, like tiny bit. That might be too much. And mull that and then and test that out. And now I will need to scrape that up. But one thing I want to show you, mix that up here. I'm going to show you some of these other pigments on paper and how they behave, because I think that's helpful. So to properly do this, it takes me another probably 15 minutes, which you don't want to sit there and watch me do this for 15 minutes. I'll finish this up after the workshop and then let you know if that was a bomb or not, if I put too much of the binder. Actually, that feels better already. Interesting. So hopefully I didn't get it too shiny. Yeah, okay, so that bloomed a lot better. Let me show you that. Dispersed a lot better there. That flowed through a lot more happy. So I think that was good to add one more drop. You see how that goes. You just have to keep testing. It's going to be different for each one. So here's, let's see. I'm going to move this aside. So I'm going to move this for now and show you some of these other colors. So just took my gloves off because it was getting very sweaty. Okay, so let me just show you. Here is this is the same burnt mountain, fully processed. And you can see I can make it much darker. It disperses really, really well. So that's the nice properties there. So take a look at this though. This is fun to experiment. When you mix your ochres like this, these iron oxides, with, say, a dark blue, this is Mayan blue, like you can with burnt sienna, that makes a beautiful gray or black even. I could make black. Like that. And likewise, so this is my burnt mountain. If I add
Roseann,
yeah,
what colors did you mix to get that black?
the burnt mountain and the dark blue, the Mayan blue. You could get the same using indanthrone blue. Here I'm adding yellow to it, and it creates a lighter tan color. So iron oxides mix beautifully. That's just one of the properties I love about them. They make these beautiful, beautiful colors. So here's the full-on burnt mountain color. Here it is mixed with Mayan blue, and here it is mixed with yellow. So you can do a lot with these. So take a look at these. This is the Chiricahua, the rock that, I had to crush these with the crusher, which I'll show you in a minute. Look at the color of this one. It's very, oops, get that up there so you can see it out of the glare, very orange compared to that burnt mountain. We'd call that an orange ochre, right? So what happens when I mix that? Let's take a look. It's just interesting to see. So I'm going to mix it with that dark blue. Turns it into a really beautiful, I can go gray brown, or I can go all the way almost black, dark. And now also, just to show you the other spectrum, this looks really gross. This is the yellow ochre from the Painted Desert. It just doesn't look pretty in the pan, but it makes a really pretty yellow ochre on the paper. See, the lights are, the overhead light is shining on the wet paper. So let's see if I can fix that a little. Oh, I just smeared yellow paint all over my document camera. So I'm mixing, just to show you here, yellow ochre with a blue. This is a manganese blue. So this is my wild yellow ochre from northern Arizona, and it turns into a really beautiful green. Look at that blue green. Once it dries, I'll be able to show it to you more, but look at that beautiful green. So you can get these incredible colors out of your natural pigments. Just for fun, I'll show you yellow ochre and magenta. Just a little tiny. So that becomes a really pretty, like adobe rose color. I'll let those dry and then we can look at those in a minute. But just to show you all the things that you can do, this pigment here is from Onion Creek. You see the sparkles? And this processed out into gorgeous paint that does crazy sparkles. Not all of them will, so I'll get all excited and think that it's going to sparkle, but sometimes the mica disintegrates. This was dry, so I'm having to get it active again. But this is the paint with the sparkles. So. Okay, well let me do the second half of the slideshow, and we can come back and look at those. Yeah, that's a fun one. But look at how as these are drying, how beautiful the colors are. Yeah, let's do the second half, which will hopefully answer some more questions, and then we'll come back to final Q&A. So this next half is more about the process of all and testing all these different things. So Grace, I'm going to screen share. Let's see. There we go. All right, Grace, is that showing the Let's Go Hunting?
Yes.
Okay, great. Oops. Okay. All right, now someone asked about processing rocks. So turn this back on so you can see me. This is what I use to process rocks. This is called The Crunch. It is available from a guy on eBay. Grace is going to put the link in here. It's expensive, you know, this is handmade. He welds these up together from this huge, massive blocks of steel. And it's created for this whole subset of people who go out looking at, they go to old gold mines that are no longer active, and they collect quartz, and they crush up the quartz and sift it out to find gold powder. And they collect the gold powder, and it's a thing. So he makes The Crunch. It's $250, but this is how I process rock. And so you put the rock in the hopper there, you can see on the upper right, and those plates are textured. Those are huge steel plates, and you put them together at a certain, you know, squeeze the rock, and then when you run the grinding wheel, it moves the plates like this, and it crushes them up. They kind of move on top of each other in this elliptical pattern. It's quite brilliant. And you can see at the bottom there, that's what comes out at the bottom. So then that powder is what I put into the grinder, the burr grinder. These burr grinders, this one is a Capresso. Been really impressed with it. You need to burr, not blade. Burr grinders are what you need. Blades will just disintegrate. Those are the cheap coffee grinders. But this was like 20 bucks on eBay. There's tons of them. So that's how I process rocks. Someone asked if you can, use a hammer, like put them in a bag. No, that doesn't work. Ask me how I know. That was the first thing I tried. And what happens is your bag blows up, the rock cuts it, you get stuff all over the place. And it's just not going to be worth the time. If someone comes up with another way to do it, let me know. Also, if you, if you try wrapping it in towelage or something, you're just going to get fibers in your powder. So that's just not going to work either. So unfortunately, it looks like grinders are it. So this is the powder as it came out of through the sieves. And then that's the mulling. So this is that funky looking color of yellow ochre. But on the paper, even though it looks ucky in the pan, and even there, it's kind of like, ew, that's not going to be nice. It's lovely yellow ochre on the paper. So you really have to just experiment. That's from the Painted Desert. So here are the results. I took notes on what I was using, different ratios and things. That's how I started learning. And I'd get too gummy and I'd add more water and a little more binder and try to keep track. And it was interesting how it processed out. So the rose color, it was almost rose color, but it was closer to the red than I anticipated. It wasn't quite as rosy, but it is a differential color. It's probably the same rock. In fact, this is all the same rock, just maybe heated at different times in its lifespan to different colors, because ochres change. You can change the color of an ochre. So as you know, burnt umber, burnt sienna. So sienna is one color, and then if you heat it up quite a bit, it darkens, changes color. So the darker red there is probably a more heated part of the rock, differentially heated. Now, again, on the internet, there's some crazy stuff. You don't want to do this. There's one website that says, oh, you can put, if you find yellow ochre, put it in your oven and it'll turn into red ochre. Don't do that, because this stuff can release all sorts of stuff you don't want floating around in your oven, your home. Definitely don't play with that kind of stuff. That's just for laboratories, not for home use. Here is the purple ochre I collected in the Tucson Mountains in the wash that comes out of Brown Mountain. And it was so much fun to find this purple rock and then turn it into paint that actually does have a dark purple hue. Beautiful, beautiful paint. One of my favorites. I use it a lot. I mix it with the dark blues and the commercial burnt sienna, and it makes great desert rocks if you're in this region. All right, here was another interesting experiment. So first, as you can see in my field notes, I said it was Catalina Mountains granite. I've always thought this was granite. So it's just all over Lower Bear Creek and the Catalina Mountains, these black and white rocks with tons of mica in them. And I thought, ooh, that could make really cool paint, right? Maybe it'll be like all sparkly, black, crazy fun. But after I processed it, it's interesting. The mica actually didn't go sparkly. It was probably too weak. It kind of went away, even though there was a ton in it. And it ends up, after some research, it's actually not granite at all. It's called Algan Gneiss, Gneiss, and the black is actually magnetite. So interesting there. There's a lot of magnetite within other rocks. It gets eroded out, and that's what ends up in the creek beds and washes. So as I said, you don't have to have lots of expensive stuff. You can try crushing rocks with a mortar and pestle. Be careful. You need a really strong one. I got this big one from an Oriental grocery where they do an Oriental cooking, Korean cooking. They do a lot of mortar and pestle work. So that's a really big, heavy. It's like this big, and I think it was like $25. It's granite. You really want a strong one. You can get also, I noticed on eBay and Amazon, you can get a slightly smaller one. Jamie Oliver cooking stuff. He sells one. It was, I think, $16. I have it here. I'll show it to you. And that's a good one. And you need to like grind and crush and crush and crush and just see how much powder you can get. And then use the coffee filter method. So put your soil rock crushings in water, get it all splooched around, and then pour it around the filter. So what you're trying to do is get the finest, lightest stuff around the edges. So that's just an easy and expensive way to play with that from thrift store stuff. Just get a strainer and stuff from a thrift store. So here's an example. It was briefly in the video of, I was at Lower Bear Creek. I saw in the water around the edges, there was this really dark streaks. It wasn't magnetite, but like super dark brown. I thought, ooh, that could be pigment. So I collected it in a little jar I had with me. And I thought, well, it could be, plant material, like degrading plant materials. I smelled it. It didn't smell like, sulfury, rotting stuff. And it put it on my hand, and it's like, oh, well, that's mineral, and it's pretty, it's brown. So I processed it very quickly using since it was already, nature did the work. It was already run through a bunch of cycles in the water from floods. So a lot of sifting's already been done. It was full of mica. Again, nature had done the work. And I processed it with that filter method, and then just using a little cheap, the mortar. You can get these little tiny white mortar and pestles from it. You'll see them at thrift stores. Everybody probably gets one for their kitchen at some point and never uses them. It's a spice grinder. And I just put a gum Arabic solution in there and processed a little bit really quick just to play. And indeed, it's like, oh my gosh, this ended up being an iron oxide. And the reason I could tell is the way it behaved. It mixed with other colors. So it created black from Mayan blue, and it mixed with the yellow and the magenta to make really pretty colors. So I knew it was a true pigment. And the research was, I found out it is called, it's limonite, or gutite. And it's the iron oxide, and the mica is incredible in it. So it's all sparkly and beautiful. And then it ended up just being a lovely, lovely color. So very fun. It also, if you look at it under a pocket loupe, it has teeny tiny grains of what they're called sand rubies, which are garnets. So that's a very special paint. All right, how about other sources? We talked about this a little briefly. What else can you use? Burnt wood from wildfires. So true charcoal and then soot, those are two different things. So soot you can actually collect from, say, the inside of a fireplace. If you've been burning a lot of pine, soot needs like that oily resin to create, or an oil lamp, right? The inside of the oil lamp, you can actually collect that and make paint from that using the gum Arabic binder, or crush up charcoal, see if you can get it fine enough. The burnt bone I talked about, bone black, there's a real, you need to learn how to create a very low oxygen fire and burn those bones over a long period of time to get that bone to the density and color you need. Other sources, plant-based pigments are called dye pigments or lake pigments, and require a whole different kind of processing. So basically you have to precipitate the dye with an inert binder, with a mordant. So if you're into dyeing fabrics, you use that term mordant, which is a metallic salt, is often used. So you've got to learn a whole new chemistry. And first of all, you have to figure out how to precipitate a dye out of a plant. So, or an animal such as sepia comes from the ink sac of the cuttlefish. Indian yellow, if you don't know, It's it comes from a solution called purree, Purree, which is specifically made from the urine of cattle fed only on mango leaves and water. So interesting stuff there. Madder, the color madder, which is a fugitive color, meaning it fades, is made from the plant Rubia tinctorum. And indigo, this has the best backstory of all. So we'll indigo, of course, the very famous color. It's from the plant Indigofera. There are many species. And one of those species is native to Central America. And the color Mayan blue is traditionally made from Indigofera mixed with a clay from the region. And it is a very specific to the region, that clay, to make this beautiful Mayan blue. And interestingly, so the Mayan Empire, the Mayan people lived in that region for thousands of years, and there are deep water, freshwater sinks. They're big, deep 1,000-foot caves. They're sunken, kind of collapsed caves full of water at the bottom. And that's where they threw their victims of sacrifice to their gods for their religious ceremonies. And they had painted their victims completely in indigo, in Mayan blue, indigo in this clay. And these sinks are now like meters thick with Mayan blue pigment. It's kind of gruesome, but that's your gruesome story for the day. That and Indian yellow, you might never use again, is made from the urine of cattle. All right, so I was just touching briefly on other sources. I want to kind of wrap that up by saying, above all, have fun, be safe and be smart. Don't believe everything you read on the internet. Stay legal. And then what we'll do is, if anyone comes up with enough pigment they would like to share, we can do a pigment swap amongst each other too, and mail each other pigments. So we do that by using self-addressed stamped envelopes. If somebody says, hey, I've got extra pigment, I'd love to share, I'll swap with you. So or just the giveaway. So let me come back. All right, everybody, let's go back to gallery view and turn on your videos and sound, and let's answer questions. Kathy Bauman, thanks for bringing up cochineal. So as soon as you turn on do they know, do the dogs know you just turned on your mic? So cochineal beetles are common in the Southwest. Those of you who aren't down here, on prickly pear cactus, you'll sometimes see the pads are covered in this white puffy stuff. And under that's a protective layer that the cochineal beetles put out. We're gonna have to, someone's gonna have to mute. Okay, so those beetles are hidden under that white. And up here in the Southwest, it's a different species than the one they use in Central America, but the color red, the cochineal red, the red that the redcoats, the British made their red coats from back in time, is from the cochineal beetle. And I have a friend collected. Sorry, I can't put my hands on it now. Anyway, friend collected some to see if we could make cochineal paint from it, but no, ours are too weak. There's not enough pigment to really make much from it. And what you can get out of it fades really quickly. And I haven't learned what mordant to use. And so that's that whole chemical thing where I don't know. I haven't learned that yet. So that's my next rabbit hole. So Judy's asking if her questions can be seen. Judy, you can either ask them verbally. Grace can go find them. I don't see the chat when I'm presenting. So Grace, if you can find Judy's questions.
You may have to re-ask the questions. My Zoom crashed mid-class, so I've lost the chat log. So if you if there's a question.
Yeah, why don't
re-ask
you
it.
just verbally do it, Judy?
Yeah, no problem. I'm just turning off my speaker so I won't get feedback. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, weird. Okay, I know what's happening. I've got a couple devices to help me. One of them is that I used a tile, like just a shiny tile, and I sanded it down. Does that work?
Yes. Oh, you're gonna have to mute when I answer, I think. So
What's going on there?
yeah, so what you're going to just experiment, you just don't want the surface that you're mulling on to absorb too much water, or it'll suck the pigment and water down into the tile. Does that make sense?
Can you say that again?
So the surface that you're mulling on needs to be not absorptive. You don't want water and pigment to be sucked down into your tile, or you're just going to be grinding pigment into the tile and it'll never come back out. So just make sure it's slick enough, it's non-porous and enough of a texture that you can get that grinding motion. I shouldn't even use the word grinding, the planar motion to get the surfaces going. If it's too slick, it's not going to work. It'll be like, you won't get any mulling at all.
Okay, great. And then the other was about honey. And I'll go and see if I can find the other questions from other folks too, or they can ask them, because I think there were a few. I thought something might have gone wrong, Grace. So honey, sorry about the echo. Is there a particular kind to use? Like, does it matter if it's the solid honey or the liquid honey?
Good question. I have strong opinions about honey. I feel like a great deal of the honey you're getting in your grocery stores is probably half fake. And I would look like it's made from corn syrup. And then it's just sort of made to look like honey. That's just my conspiracy theory. But anyway, I would buy honey from like a local bee guy or bee woman. That's what I use. I get my honey from someone in Arizona called the Bee Man.
Yeah, so mine are both like I just have some that are liquidy and some that are solid, and I'm wondering if it makes a difference. They are actually honey, but there's that solid stuff and then there's the stuff you can pour. Does it make a difference for the paint?
Yeah, if you're going to use honey, it has to be, you have to liquefy it. So you're going to have to turn it back into solution if it's solid. So it's got to be able to be dispersed. So you would have to heat it and get it into solution. I probably wouldn't use the solid one. I'd use the one that's more liquid.
I'm just seeing if I can find questions from above.
So I see there, it popped up, are the paints permanent? So not all handmade paints are going to be totally permanent. Iron oxides are very stable and very permanent. That I do know. I did some research on that, but some of them might not be. If it's not iron oxide, if it's a different, I'm guessing, and I would have to do research, that the metal-based inorganic pigments are going to be much more stable and longer lasting than the say the plant-based pigments. So you have to kind of just experiment. Doing them for just your journal, they're going to be okay because they won't be exposed to a lot of light. But if they're exposed to a lot of light, if you're doing a painting, then you're going to want to test it for light fastness first. So you do that by, like I would take this, label them all what they are, and then go, put it in a windowsill with direct light for weeks and weeks. You might need some people use a spectrometer to see just how much they fade. If everybody knows the story of, I think it was Turner, I know Velasquez, the Spanish painter Velasquez used Scarlet Lake a lot, and Scarlet Lake is made from plants, and it's incredibly fugitive, And his paintings today look very muted, but if you look at when people digitally change them to what they would have looked like when he first painted them, boing, it's like, wow, bright reds and purples and everything. But now they're all like gray because they faded. So that's why we check that out. Okay, so more, is it possible to over mull? No. You'll just get so tired of it. It's just like, no, because it's, you're just binding existing molecules to each other. You can't overdo it. You can put too much binder or not enough binder, but you can't over mull it. And I showed you what it looks like when you put too much of the binder. You get that really hard lacquery. I bought a lot of handmade paint from people on Etsy and sources like that, and they're not. Most of them are pretty not very good. They're usually pretty lacquery, and some of them even had fillers. I had some that I determined had actually chalk in them. It's bad pigment. So yeah, any other questions? Just go ahead and ask. We don't have to do chat. Chat's really difficult to manage.
I have a question.
Sure.
I went in my yard and I found these like chalk colored rocks, and you write on them with onto another rock and they leave a mark. Is that good rock for pigment then?
I would think so. Yes. There's actually a geologic test that's called the streak test, I think, where you streak it on something and you can determine what it is based on the streak color. But yeah, I would say it's got an oxide in it, for sure. Where are you?
Minnesota.
Yeah. So you do some research, find out what's in your region and rock and see, or get on a geologic forum.
We're on the end of the glacial dump.
Aha!
And so I have 40 feet of glacial till underneath me.
Sweet. So you do some research, find out what's in it, what the geologic properties are, what species of rock.
Half of Canada.
Yeah. Yeah. So there I am down in Mexico with half of Arizona, and you're in Minnesota with half of Canada. So that tells us something, doesn't it?
I have a question. Have you ever used obsidian, or is it even possible to crush that?
I have not. It would probably not have pigment in it because it's closer to, it acts more like glass.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have cut it. So I'm a lapidary and metalsmith, and I make jewelry from rocks I cut and polish. And I use a lot of obsidian, and it polishes beautifully, but it behaves more like glass. So
okay.
I would think it would probably just, I don't know. Again, you can experiment, but find out what's in it, be safe.
Thank you.
I have a question about binders. I'm interested in using native tree resins, and I had read somewhere that black cherry is a possibility. Have you ever heard of black cherry?
I'm not familiar with it, but I would definitely, I wouldn't hesitate to experiment.
Do you know?
So that would be a prunus species?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So would it be this? It would be the actual resin from the plant?
Yes. In around February, it actually puts out some resinous materials that come seeping out of the trunks.
Oh, interesting. So sort of like maple sap.
Yeah, but it tends to be almost gelatinous.
Oh, interesting. Maybe do some research through some botanists, like most areas. So there's some great resources for, like in Southern Arizona, there's a botany group on Facebook that is super active. And I'm certain, like I could go on there and if I had a plant question like that, someone would know the answer. There's mostly scientists. So like there's a bug group and there's, there's just so much out there that is, people love to share that kind of stuff. This is one of the benefits of the internet. There's a lot of crappy stuff out there, but there's also a great way to connect with people.
Thanks.
What about pipestone? I live about 100 miles from the pipestone quarries in southern Minnesota. And the Indians use it to carve into pipes and everything.
Yeah.
Know anything?
I have used pipestone in lapidary work, and I would want to, literally, this was the research part that I was talking about. Google, look for science papers and geologic information. What is pipestone? Find out what species of rock it is, and if it has any pigment qualities. It's very red, is it not? Reddish? At least the one I worked with was. What is yours?
Red. Yep, dark red.
Yeah. So because of that color, part of me goes, I bet that has iron in it. So I wouldn't hesitate to do some research and find out. Yeah. And then one way you could experiment is if there's a big deposit of pipestone, see if there's any creeks or wash areas where it's eroded a lot, and you can actually gather already eroded pipestone. You don't have to crush it yourself.
Yeah, well, it's very protected in that area. It's owned by the natives, but they make jewelry and they make jewelry. I could get a piece of jewelry and that'd be good.
Well, look, if you wanted to look for, pipestone is available all over the world, probably. Yeah, you definitely don't collect in sites that are important to native peoples. That would be bad. But yeah, you could order pipestone from a lapidary supply, for example. But do the research.
I think Daniel Smith makes a pipestone, if I'm not mistaken. I think in their Primatech line, they have a pipestone pigment.
Yes, so Daniel Smith has a whole line. I didn't see who said that, but thank you for reminding me. They call it
Judy. Primatech.
Primatech, yes. And I went way down that rabbit hole. I probably bought most of their Primatechs. They're gorgeous. In fact, I have one here. So this was like one of my favorite. This is a Primatech Daniel Smith called Sleeping Beauty Turquoise. And it is literally there's one mine in the whole world for I'll take that back. There's one in Arizona, Sleeping Beauty, and then there's several in Iran called Persian turquoise, same. And it's it's a gemstone quality turquoise. And somehow they got off cuts or whatever and made paint from it. And it's now closed, so you can no longer get Sleeping Beauty. I've worked with it in my jewelry. And that's the color. It's gorgeous. So, but yeah, Primatech, if you, and I think you're right, Judy, they have a pipestone. So do your research, see if you can find some that's crushable. It's probably a really, really difficult to crush one, but you can see what you can do. Other questions? Oh, does greenleaf and blueberry produce pipestone? I've missed that somehow. I seem to own all of their paints, which is very expensive, isn't it? So yeah, I didn't realize she made that. So Jess Greenleaf will she'll come out with some paints and then they'll disappear. Maybe her source is gone or whatever. So yeah, if you see it, buy it. So, but making your own is also fun. Any other? Okay, so back to, interesting. So Kathy Bauman says, she knows that Native people in Arizona use mesquite bark to paint pottery. Well, We'll have to see. Unfortunately, I don't see Muffin Burgess had signed up for this, and she might know. I'll find out from her. She'll be watching this later. So she works with me at the Desert Laboratory on Tumamoc Hill. And so she knows a lot about native uses, early uses of Sonoran Desert species for art and stuff. So remind me, Kathy, to ask Muffin. Cool. Okay. Any other questions? Or want to see any demos or anything? One new. Nope. Guys are quiet.
Can you hear me
okay? Turn up your
Okay, I'm gonna try something. Go back to somebody else and then I'll come back.
Okay, because we heard you just. No, it's.
That.
Yeah, sorry, I had to mute you. We were getting really bad feedback.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I just went down a device the other day. Can you hear me now?
Better.
Okay, good. You said demos. Sure. I've been playing around with them just for fun. I did a little landscape and a pear, and I mixed some raw sienna, and then I threw in some Viridian because I just had pigment. So it was super fun. So I'd love to see anything you have to demo. And I have just a question that I think is fun for those of us who, I'm like you, I got a bunch of Primatech. Like, what do you do with all your paint? Do you paint that much, or do you just enjoy having it? Or
good question. That's a really good question. So I love paint. And when I first started watercoloring, yes, I have dozens of watercolor colors. However, my main focus is field sketching, field arts, nature journaling, being out, observing, and using the sketching and the colors to study things. I'm not producing studio art. I'm not a studio artist. I don't make things for sale that way. I'm using my art as a study, way to study nature and enjoy nature. It's also meditative. So I found that having too many colors was distracting. And I spent too much time trying to decide what colors and having, palettes this big for the field. So that's my field kit. That's all the paint I use now, with one added, and that these are the natural pigments that I make myself or buy. So this is all I carry. And so what are these? These are, I can, if it's helpful, I'll switch to see if I can hold it up in the document camera. I have to be able to see it here. So, and it's a mix of handmade and natural and then the commercially available paints. So these are commercial paints. They are made by Jess Greenleaf, but the pigments are commercial pigments. So this is I think it's a chrome yellow, it's a neutral yellow, a magenta, and a cyan blue. So it's very close to manganese blue. These are the primary colors. Red is not a primary color. So you make red from adding a little bit of yellow to the magenta. That's just my dirty yellow I use for mixing. It's really gnarly. And then I use burnt sienna, or I'll substitute my own, one of my own siennas, or red ochres, like my Chiricahua. That's synonymous. So that would work there too. And then this is Mayan blue. I don't think Jess makes her Mayan blue out of indigo and chalk exactly the way the Mayans did. I'm not sure exactly how she makes it, but I think it might have an indigo base. So that's my primary palette. And then for my extras, I carry this. I've got my Tucson Mountains purple ochre. I've got my Onion Creek ochre. I've got my lapis lazuli, Sleeping Beauty, my yellow ochre, and then that's a graphite. So that's just sparkles. So to answer your question the long way, I use a mix of handmade. So these are my handmade pigments. And then these are my, these are also handmade, but they're commercial. Commercial meaning I didn't gather the pigment myself. I bought them from usually just Greenleaf now. But you can see just how you would use, like, here's that onion. Need another empty sheet here. I didn't refresh it, so it's pretty dry. But that's the one with that's the one with all the sparkles. It's really dry, so I need to refresh it. There. Let me turn this down. There you go. So that's the Onion Creek, but experiment, do your own pigments. And so for example, the natural yellow ochre here, as I showed before, treat it like a triad. So yellow ochre plus, let's see what it looks like with the lapis lazuli. Does this make a green? Because yellow and blue should make a green. Actually, so I'm experimenting. So no, this lapis doesn't play well with that yellow ochre. Does it play well with, that's just gray. So let's try the lapis with, let's try the Sleeping Beauty turquoise, which is a copper-based metallic paint, right? Because these turquoises, azurites are based on copper. There it is, raw. Isn't that gorgeous? Let's mix it with yellow and see if it makes a neat green. It does. Look at that. So just experiment and play, and you can find your own beautiful paints that you can create your own little palettes and maybe have a different palette for different place you're going. This is very much, for me, this one has very much based on the American Southwest. But if I were going somewhere else, maybe I would make a little palette that has different paint in it. So, but I try not to have too much paint with me, otherwise I get distracted. Any other questions? We're really like a couple minutes from wrapping up. So Grace, can you drop the PDF in the chat again so people can get that? It's, if you didn't download it before, or if you weren't on the call or on the Zoom when we were giving that, the chat goes away if you drop off. So those are the notes, has all the links and information. And if you have any questions, or you're working on your pigments and you just are kind of like lost and you're like, I need help, email me, let me know. I'm always happy to help. Any final thoughts? No, you guys are
fun. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Really informative, yeah.
Thank you so much for coming.
I have one last question. The PDF thing, yeah. I don't know how to take it off here and put it on my downloads. Is it going to be emailed also?
Yes, I will. So, thank you for reminding me too. You will get, as soon as I get the recording, you will get a page up on, I'll get a private page for you. And all of this, the download for this PDF, the recording, all the other information will be on there, lots of other stuff, pictures of what I've done, samples of the paint that I mold. So you'll have that. So I'll send that in about a day, maybe at the latest Monday.
Very expiring, Roseann. Thank you so much.
And then if you guys end up with pigment you want to share and swap, let me know, email me, and then I'll email the group and say, you know, Judy's got pigment she wants to share. Send her a self-addressed stamped envelope and she'll mail you half a thing of pigment. I've got little baggies I can send to people too. I had to order 500 of them. So I've got a lot of little baggies. Wonderful. Well, everybody go out, go find some wild pigment and experiment. It's really fun.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is great. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. So next stop we'll be doing plants.
Wonderful.
Yeah, well, give me a while. That's a hard one. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Bye, Roseann.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, all.